Hello. Hi. How are you? This should be working now. Welcome to the first of its kind live stream on this channel. I haven't actually streamed before. I hope I'm using OBS correctly. So yeah, I wanted to make a behind the scenes video on my moth movie because, to be honest, I'm really proud of it. I like how it turned out. And I thought, why not do it in a live format? Because then people can ask me questions about it. And I think it's pretty cool. At least I really like to see what's happening behind the scenes in different types of media I like. Let me know if like my microphone is too high. I think it is because it's going in the red. This should be a little bit better. Hopefully. So yeah, mod movie. My project was really fun to make. I had a lot of fun making it, and I also learned a lot during the way. Probably the most important thing I learned is that in order to really learn the intricacies of Blender, you actually just need to create something. Like if you want to make movies, make a movie. There's just literally no other way to learn all the subtle things that are happening inside it. Whoops, okay, we got some technical difficulties. Hello, someone just came into the chat. Another person just came in. Hello, Cello Monster, Ginger, Music. Welcome to the stream. You know, we're gonna have fun. We're gonna talk a little bit about mod movie and what is actually happening inside it. I hope you guys can hear and see everything. Had some technical difficulties a little while ago. So first let's talk a little bit about the actual moth. It's really simple. There's not that much to say about it. Over here I just have a simple IK rig for the legs. The only special thing about this rig is the fact that it is double jointed, sort of, like with an asterisk. The double jointing doesn't work that way, that well. So you need to be careful with it, because currently the way I've implemented it here is the first joint actually ends up with more control than the second joint. And of course I have a pole for each arm. Each arm has two separate poles. Nothing too special about it. What's actually happening is I have a damped track constraint that is going towards the next joint. So for example, over here, if I can pull out my little tool for drawing. Really, you can't hear me. Can you hear me a little bit better now? I guess my microphone is a bit wonky. If it does turn into static again, let me know. I'll be careful. So what's actually happening is I just have a single bone here. It has a damp track to this bone, and then I have this bone over here, which is damp track to this joint. And in the end they all just snap together to the final IK joint, and that's how I make, you know, quotations mark. That's how I make the double jointed limbs. In the end they were pretty useful. I'm glad you enjoyed the movie, to the people who saw it. No, it is not CAD modeling, this is just sub-D modeling. In fact, if I click on the model, you can see it has a sub-D modifier. If I disable it, this is actually the base mesh that I created. It's really chunky, but that's fine. So, what else to talk about? Over here I have some IK controls. I'll tell you right now, I never ended up using these. I always went with IK. I never actually used forward kinematics. I'm a bit of a novice at actually animating, so I don't really know where you're supposed to really use forward kinematics. I guess it's when you move the whole model, but basically I just moved the root joint because I do have a root bone for that. There we go. Yep, so I also have a bunch of poses because they did add a pose library. Currently you have to enable it through a plugin. So let me see. Yeah, I'm glad the audio issue is fixed because I was just trying not to move around a lot. I do have a pretty shitty mic. No, I don't name every moth. They all have two moths, two names. It's either moth or moth R&D body color, which means random body color. I'll get to why I have two separate models for that, because I actually don't need to have two separate models. That's just kind of how it ended up. So anyway, yeah, I do have a couple of poses here. At least I should. I don't. You need to be in pose mode, I think, and then animation. Yeah, see, I have a bunch of poses right here. You just drag them on. And this is just to quickly set up a couple of more commonly used poses. Very useful, this library, pose library. They didn't have this when I started making the movie, so I'm really glad about that. So currently what we're actually looking at, if I pull out my library, is the library file for the moth. Over here in characters, I just pull it out from my library whenever I need it in a scene somewhere. For example, let me crack open a new scene. All I would need to do is get my library, although it doesn't look very nice here. Go into models, characters, and then I can just put the mod over. I put over linked, so it actually spawns in as an instance. And there we go. So other than this, in order to actually make it work, you need to go into object, what was it, relations, make library override. So I have been working with library overrides a lot. I think they're super useful because it means you don't need to have the data for your moth or your character just replicated 1,000 times when you have it used a lot in different scenes. It's great. Funny thing though, when I started making this movie, they didn't actually have library overrides, you know, and that was a bit of an issue because I had to port over to library overrides. Before that, I was actually copying the entire rig over every shot. You're gonna see what that ended up doing to my actual movie in the end, because there were some consequences because of it. But yeah, this is great. Let's go back to the mod though. Alright, so why do I actually have two mod models in here? The reason my layout is a bit weird is because I actually use a neutral-wide monitor by default. So I have two mods. One is the regular mod, the other is the moth. Well, I do have hypno moth. So hypno moth, yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. But this is the random moth. So the reason the random moth is a separate object is because when I made them, there was actually no way to library override, or at least I didn't know how to library override materials. But it actually is possible, it turns out. In order to library override materials, the domain for the material data must not be data itself, must not be the mesh data, but rather the object itself. And then you're able to do library overrides on materials. However, I did not know this at the time when I made the movie, so I just made a whole separate model for it, and I just kept it. The same kind of goes for the mod with the hypno eyes. Again, I could not actually library override back then, so I made a separate model. I know better now, so that won't happen again. But yeah, what the hypno eyes actually are, they're super simple. You just take the distance from the object origin, you pass that through a multiplier and a fraction to get that loop, and then a greater than to actually get the circles. Simple stuff, really. You're going to notice on the mod with the random body colors that down here it has this weird sphere. So what is that all about? Well, funny, I actually wanted to both have random colors but also be able to adjust those colors. You know, if I can, I want to have my cake and eat it too. The way I put this off is I do take the object coordinates of this sphere and use its coordinates to drive an offset on that randomness. So if I go into the mod body color, this is it right here, the way I draw the randomness is a 0 to 1 value going into the hue, saturation, I do believe this is vibrance. So you max those two out and then you add a 0 to 1 value on the hue. And that is basically the random color. And then I add a little offset, which is just the X position of this sphere. In fact, if I move it, you can see the result. So I go through all this trouble. Well, the thing is that when I started making this model, you couldn't library override custom properties. Because ideally, instead of using the X position of a sphere, you would just have a custom property down here. But they didn't have this option, use library overrideable, before. You couldn't override custom properties. However, that is fixed now. Now I don't really need this sphere, but again, all my scenes are made using this sphere, so I can't really fix that now unless I want to go through the whole animation. And yeah, it's a whole thing. As far as that goes, I do believe this is all for the rig that I created. Very fun way I actually move the ears. I discovered this by accident. If you go into this button over here and go in the individual origins, you can select all these bones, and then when you rotate them, they kind of all rotate separately, so you get this nice fold. So I use this same technique for the ears to bend them really nicely. It works great, because otherwise I would need to use some sort of rigging like IK. I shouldn't forget to read chat, I suppose. Yeah, IK for clean arcs. I do agree. I actually struggled to create a clean arc at one point. Maybe I should have used FK then. You're right about that. Yeah. So, other than that, I guess this is all I have to say about the character models themselves. You're also gonna see there's this control over here. This weird eye thing. This is for the visibility. So I needed to really quickly toggle the visibility of my object, and my object is actually comprised of several objects, so they're all just linked with a driver, their visibility property. In the viewport over here, it's linked with a driver to the location of this little widget. I have this in other objects as well, where I need to toggle the visibility of it all together, because after you library override something, it's not as easy to toggle visibility. Tutorial on library override, I don't think there's that much to talk about, and there's some great tutorials, but I definitely should make a tutorial, just because not a lot of people know how to library override materials. I myself found it out at the very end. So after I found that out, you know, things become way easier, but again, I didn't know that. So maybe I'll make a tutorial. In fact, if you guys want to see a tutorial on a particular topic, maybe you should just tell me and I should just write it down so I don't forget. You know, I'm always chasing that content. Gotta get the bag. Alright, so I guess we can move on towards the actual movie, because it's in a separate file. It's called Moth Movie 4. The reason it's actually called Moth Movie 4 is because I did make some hard saves, and the hard saves I create a copy of the whole movie in its own folder. Alright, so now we're seeing the glory that is the first scene, which is the forest. I'll clean it up a bit, because like I said, I'm actually using Ultra HD, so this looks very different on my end. You can see what this is a bunch of trees. There it is. The way I scattered them naturally had to be geometry nodes, or else it wouldn't really be me. Let's see. I did create this instance on face node. There's a couple of pluses to actually using geometry nodes instead of the hair particle system for instancing. My favorite one has to be the ability to set a minimum distance, so that the trees from this case don't get too close. I do believe it is this one. Yeah, see how I can change the density. Now I don't actually want to crash my stream right now. And you can see how this is set up. I actually have two planes, one which is the mountains and everything else, and a smaller plane where most of the action takes place. And you can see that this smaller one also has all the rocks and all the bushes, while the background doesn't really have any of that. Simply because I have a weak little computer that can only handle that much. And in vain of that, I actually made a placeholder for these trees. So over here in this particular geometry node, I have a placeholder set up. When if I just click this button, suddenly I get low poly rendering and my frame rate is a lot better. So this is very simple geometry node setup with the placeholder. I don't know how popular it is, because I don't know if anybody else has ever thought to use a placeholder here. There we go. So this is the actual setup for this. It's super short, nice and simple. There it is, distribute on points. So the way I actually pulled off the placeholder is probably with a switch, isn't it? Yeah, there it is. I have a switch, and all the switch does is it changes between two collections. The collection with the high dense mesh and the low density mesh, basically. Now this isn't the exact same thing as a proxy, because a proxy won't even bother loading the high definition mesh in the first place. Well, I'm pretty sure that this does. And maybe that's an area that Blender is still lacking a bit in. But I haven't had any issues, because ultimately the goal is to increase FPS, and this works just fine for me. I'm glad you watched it out of respect. I hope you also enjoyed it. That'd be great too. So anyway, we got to displace the subdivision, the geometry nodes, and over here we also have the high density plane. And I guess we'll go into the video editing part of this in the end, but I'll tell you right now that most of this is fake. Like, I used a lot of composition to make this first shot look decent. I guess we can just scrub through the animation now. If I open up the timeline, if I press 0 to hop to my camera, I am using a 1060 GeForce GTX. It doesn't even have RTX, no ray tracing, so you can imagine the trouble I had actually rendering stuff. Yep, there it is. Now we're seeing the whole thing. You can also see over here the old rig. Again, this is not the actual rig I showed a second ago. This is a separate rig, because back then I didn't have library overrides, and this thing is not an override. Again, that's an issue, but can't be bothered to change it currently. And yeah, they just danced. There is exclamation mark that appears for half a second. All I did is I keyed its alpha value at the end, so it doesn't actually appear for the rest of it. And there's this giant bird near the end, I guess. Maybe I should just go into video editing right now and show you. I do have the video editing in a separate file. There we go. It's a big one. My CPU is ramping up right now. So you can see how much composition there is here, because the actual face here, the giant bird head that's in the background, the real ones will know what that is an overlay. If I can remember which one, it was this one. Without that, you just get this. But also the entire sky is an overlay, if I remember correctly. If I disable this, there it is. This is just a gradient texture. And if I disable this, the whole sky goes away. So, as I said, this is a very fake scene. Most of this is not actually there. Except this is solid, because there is no sky. The reason this happens is because I actually had a lot of trouble getting the sky right. I'm not that good at that. Anyway, let's move back to the actual movie. I don't know what else to talk about here. Yes, another great plus to geometry nodes, if I re-enable the placeholder modes so we get decent frames, is that you can actually change how much the objects follow the normal, because in the hair particles they just follow 100%, and you get this effect where you know, the trees are now pointing in a weird direction, but over here I can just change it so they're not always, you know, it's just a middle ground, just like a compromise. So that's another great thing that I was able to do with geometry nodes. Overall, very happy with this instance on face nodes. I actually use it 6 more times throughout this animation. Moving on to the second shot. Well, the second shot actually got lost to time. It just you cannot find it anymore. I'm sorry about that, but I do just have the footage for it, which is what I used. It's very interesting, because when I started rendering this, when I started working on this shot, we were still actually Blender 3.0 had just come out. And I remember, because I was doing experiments with Cycles X back then. Now, no need to tell you that there's been actually 2 more versions of Blender that have come out since, and things have changed quite a bit. So somewhere on the line I actually lost the second scene. And the next thing that follows is actually the stage scene. The stage scene where they, you know, sing and dance on a stage. I am sorry though that I didn't actually add any music to the stream. I don't know if I should have, because of copyright and stuff. So anyway, what you can see here is the way I actually did the transition to the dancing. Maybe I can go into EV without too much performance drag here. Is that I actually keyed the visibility on these. I do believe through the I keyed the render visibility. So these blocks over here in the back, these parts of the stage actually pop in and out of existence. That's how I actually made that transition. So it's part of the actual footage. The background mods, there they are. They're just kind of chilling. And you can see the whole stage is just this. This was also another one that was kind of tough to light. In the end, I just went with a giant point light at the top, which I think looks fine. But more interesting, I had to use some very interesting hacks for the floor. I haven't actually used the light path node before, but over here you can see I did use it. Let me just see which overlay that is. Oh, there we go. And I've actually left a little note for myself. So the idea is that the light that came out from the floor, because too much light was hitting the floor and it was just overwhelming the bottom side of my moths. Maybe I can show that. Tell me how this looks on stream, because I'm not sure. The light that was getting bounced back was too much. So what I used is camera ray, which is a light path node. It basically, rays that come directly from the camera have a value of 1. So all the stage you're seeing currently has a value of 1, while bounce light and everything else has a value of 0. So then I can use that and say, okay, value of 1 means you have a certain strength, value of 0 means you have another. And basically I lowered the bounce lights. You can see if they were the same, you can see how much more light is actually hitting the mod, and I didn't like that, so I reduced it by just manipulating the way bounce lights, the intensity of bounce lights, which is not physically accurate, but then again, giant mods don't exist in real life, so when did physical accuracy come into play here? I'm just kidding. The whole thing, well, not the whole thing, there is one scene that I had to render with Eevee, simply because it had volumetrics. We'll get to that scene. You can probably tell which one it is, because only one scene really has volumetrics. This is because cycles can't really handle volumetrics that well. It's not limited availability for hardware, Gary, as much as it is limited finances. When I was making this, there was no crypto crash, which is another thing, so GPUs were really going for very high. So let's talk a little bit about these candles, because they are only visible for 3 frames, but I did put some elbow grease into them. This flame is actually a geometry node. You can see it wiggling about and around. Now I have made a better flame for this for my next movie, but maybe I can show you just that one. But let's first finish with this scene. I don't actually want to remove all the panels again, unless I forget to do that. We'll see. There's nothing too special about this scene. All it is this mod here is the actual one that is animated. Again, this is not a library, alright? Still haven't gotten to those because they were literally not in Blender when I started making these. At least they weren't available for collections, which is what you need for characters, really. The rest of these mods are all instances. All instances of this one mod. Again, the random body color mod. There's also 2 mods here that are praying, and they don't have eyes. I'm not sure why they don't have eyes. Let's not mind that for a moment. So the actual Thomas Edison mod is very interesting because I had to composite that because of 2 reasons. It had to clip in a very interesting way around this canvas, and also it had to be black and white. Now I didn't want to make yet another moth model just so I can get a black and white material, so I just made it black and white in composition. In fact, if we do go to composition over here, you can see the hue saturation value for the second view layer. Because view layer 2, if I go to view layer 2, is the one that actually contains the Thomas Edison moth. The Thomas Edison moth does pop up a bit earlier, before he actually snaps to the plane. If I can actually get the right framing. There we go. So he rotates in front a little bit here. He has a color. And then he just snaps over here. Or he just appears. And he starts talking to you about stuff, I guess. And this is a cutout. This is a holdout, I believe. Yeah, there we go. Holdout to actually cut off these parts of his body. And behind him, I have a plane because, well, I need to composite this on top of the other shot, right? So the background cannot be transparent. The background that is immediately behind the Thomas Edison moth. If I move back here, I can actually enable his collection. So we can kind of see how he fits into frame. And yeah, overall very simple composition, but there we go. What else to talk about? He has some accessories, nothing special here. I guess we can move on to the next scene. So this is the next scene where the moth actually looks up at you. And you can see my frames are all over the place. Like, why am I currently on frame 1774? Well, when I started, I thought it was a good idea to actually keep the scenes in line with the audio. Later on, I came to regret that. It's actually better to keep the audio in sync with the scenes, and all the scenes should start at frame 1. The reason is simply because when you switch between scenes, this part here keeps moving. But if all the scenes start at 1, you have to search a lot less for your frame, and that's what I prefer doing. And you will actually see that in later scenes, I do start to use that approach instead. Again, this is one of those things you can only learn if you actually start making a movie yourself. Oh, the instancing for the stage mod. No, that's not geometry nodes. That's just good old-fashioned Blender instancing. You know, Shift A, collection instance, and then you can instance any collection. That's what I use because there were geometry nodes back then, but I definitely wasn't that much into them. I haven't yet utilized the power of geometry nodes at this point. The actual photos on the table are each rendered, and I did spend some time on them for them to only be visible for a second. The photos are geometry nodes in the way that the text on them is dynamic. There's no other way to make dynamic text other than geometry nodes, and over here I have a little control for the size and whatnot. The actual node network for this is super simple. I just slap the text in. At least I do believe it was super simple. Let me just see if I press home. What did I actually do here? See, I did make this a while. Yeah, string to curves, fill curve, set material. I did subdivide the original plane. Apparently, yeah, it was a lower subdivision, which I had to do simply because the way the texture was mapped. And all of these are different geometry nodes. Or rather, all of these had a different material because I needed to switch their different textures. Although thinking about it now, maybe I could have just done this. Although now remember again, there is no socket for the image sequence node, which by the way drives me insane. But yeah, so where are all of these mods though? They are in a separate pseudo scene called Stereos, which is by the way not how I would do this if I were to do this again. Nope, not a second scene. There are a couple of issues with using a second scene. Well, the main one is organization, because if I look at the second scene where I basically took a bunch of still images, there's all sorts of images here. And you can see that what I'm doing is I'm actually just pushing the mods I'm not using back down. In reality, I should have just keyed their viewport visibility. But, you know, live and let learn, I guess. So that's a lot of scenes. But the issue is that some of these scenes, like, they're part of that shot, but others, like this one, is part of a different shot. And it gets confusing. If I want to edit that shot, where do I actually go to find this? Oh, well, obviously it's over here, frame 22 in the scene called Stills. Doesn't make sense. I would not organize things like this in a second if I get to do this again. In fact, the thumbnail, I believe, is here. There it is. This is the image for the thumbnail right here. And that's all of them. If I move back to the table photos, well, that's it for the table photos. All I did is I keyed their viewport visibility, so they pop in. Maybe I can see that. Nope. I apparently only keyed the render. Yep, there it is. You can see it's keyed. But they're basically keyed to the music. That's it. Actually, before we get to this shot, there's actually a second shot, anim shots, where I actually kept all the animation shorts that were part of the sequence that came after the previous one. Again, this doesn't make a lot of sense. I wouldn't really put these in a separate shot, but there we go. So if I just move this back to start, there we go. Now, well, this guy has kind of lost his animation. Why aren't they moving? Ah. Oh, because it's the wrong moth. It's actually the random body color mod that's animated here. So anyway, here you can see the separate animations. So this was supposed to be the one for the popcorn, that's why it's at the start. But as it turns out, I didn't measure my timing correctly. Because what I did is I split up my timeline into the different animation segments. And I wouldn't do this ever again. I would split it into separate scenes because you want special lights and different objects to be visible at any separate scene. And whenever you want to edit a particular scene, it means you need to go into the properties channels. You need to find out, okay, what was enabled here? What was really enabled here? You don't really remember anymore. So it becomes a true chore. And yeah, just my advice, don't merge things. Whenever you can split a scene, split it. You're not going to regret that. Definitely a valuable running experience for me right there. The actual popcorn, where was it? I don't remember. I did label it. Here we can see the different kernels. Where? There's a lot of kernels. I don't know how many kernels I actually made. Let me see. Yeah, I made 2000 kernels and then I simulated them with hard bodies. I do believe. As you can see, they're using the same mesh, which is important. Otherwise, this would take way too much space on the actual file. So you just make sure they're using the same mesh data. That's kind of important. How did I actually do that is a very good question because I don't remember anymore. But I did pull it off. So I'm sure it's possible. I'll have to think about that because I don't remember how I made them all use the same instance. But I did use an initial simulation to get them all into the ball, and then another one to actually move them around. That simulation is currently not baked, so that's not going to happen. And you can see a lot of my just objects. I have been keying them manually, which again is a mistake because who knows what was here now. I don't remember anymore. Very bad. Over here is actually the transition, which is super interesting. There's a transition between the stage and the photograph, or holding the camera dance, and this is that transition. It actually, the camera is above right here, and I do believe it's orthographic, or at least it's supposed to be orthographic. And if I enable the parts for it, well, there it is. Yeah, you can see them sort of transitioning. All the mods you're seeing here are instances of the original one, which is this one, the only one that's actually animated. And this one is following a path. If I remember correctly, I either made the root follow this path, because this trick here is actually just a path. It uses a special material I made, curved trace, which indeed does create a little trace. I hope you can see that. There's a little trace that follows this curve actually. I don't remember what I actually keyed to make the mods move like this. I don't see a constraint, but I know I did make them follow the curve for this, just to get a smooth motion. I'd have to look into that. Because I'm not seeing animation here, so it's a bit weird what I used. I know I didn't animate it by hand. There it is, follow path object transforms. However, why do I not see that? Well, because I'm not in the proper mode, perhaps? I'm not sure. Well, it's not a bone constraint, that's much I know. There it is, follow path, and it's keyed. That's it. And then I instance that. I also instance this strict thing. Yep, and that's pretty much it. You can see that all the elements for the transition are actually like right here in the scene. This choice was so that I didn't have to composite them later, which actually turns out to be pretty waggy. The Blender Video Compositor is not that great, or the video editor, a bit slow, in my experience. But I do hear they're making changes to that, so that's pretty exciting. Let's move over to the next scene, which would be the lectern one. If I can click on it. There we go. So this is the one with the lectern. The moth is explaining stuff. I do believe that over here I finally adopted the practice of starting at frame 1, which, wow, ingenious, right? A bunch of the visibility of different objects, or rather I just keyed them to the floor. I should really stop doing that. I just keyed them to the floor and then move them up. And this moth right here that's in the TV is material. It's actually an image sequence that just goes. The reason for this is, again, it's faster in composition, in my opinion. So the actual bulbs here in the background are a geometry node. Here we go. So what I use for these bulbs is a geometry node called instance bulbs, and it's a very interesting approach I took here. If I disable this, you see that what we have here is a point cloud. So why did I use a point cloud, right? What's the point of a point cloud? Well, the idea is that I want randomly scattered objects, but at the same time I don't want them to be getting too close to my moth, so I want to keep some sort of control over their position. So when I want to, I can just go into edit mode, select a vertex and move them. But at the same time, they're still moving randomly because of the geometry node. So really, in my humble opinion, this is like the best of both worlds, where you get randomness, but also... Oh, there's music. It's super waggy. Where you get randomness, but can also sort of control it. The bulbs themselves, in fact, most of the objects you see here are instanced, and they're all located inside the objects collection, which contains most of the stuff that you've been seeing throughout. This is because if I use an object multiple times, I just want to instance it. You know, no point in having multiple copies. Did I ever end up using this magic? No, there's also a bunch of assets that I made and never got around to using. Maybe I just forgot. Who knows? Yeah, thanks for coming, Gary. Thanks for asking questions. I don't know if how many people are actually watching right now. Let's do a little health check for this stream. Wow, 6 people. There we go. You guys are my favorites. You know that? Oh no, it's 10 people. It just updated. Wow. Everyone's here. Everyone's here. Okay. So, not all of the objects in this movie are actually in this objects collection, because, again, halfway through, I started using library overrides. And I actually brought everything into my library, which has become quite extensive now. There we go. If I go into moth movie, you can see all of the stuff I used. I even made cute little thumbnails, and I think it looks great. You can just drag this in, of course. My library isn't that special. It just says characters. Over here we have, for another movie, this is a bit of a spoiler. It takes place in a kitchen. You can probably tell that by the assortment of items I have already created for it. Somebody also asked me, did I make all the models for my movie? Yes, I did. Yes, I had a lot of fun making them. It was a very interesting experience. In fact, I think I like modeling more than I like animating, to be honest. I do enjoy it more. But you need to remember that when we're animating with moths, it's a bit weird because they have so many joints. Like, I have 2 pole targets and 6 legs. It's such a chore to animate. I don't imagine a regular biped is this much effort to animate. But we'll see probably in, well, not in the next movie, I can guarantee you that, but in like a couple of movies from now, maybe. So anyway, in this same scene, we have the hypno moth, rather the moth with the hypno eyes. If I do go into the camera, you can see that all this is the same background. Here I use the moth with the hypno eyes, which again, I didn't know back then that you could just override materials. The arms have broken probably because I did change the rig halfway through. And not only that, but you can see there's moths orbiting it actually. If I can show them. There we go. So there's a few objects that are actually orbiting this one. And the way I did that is my circle array. I just have an array modifier. Whenever I need to create a circle array, this is it. It's super simple. But it also lets me animate things because I have this offset value. So it's super useful in that way. And I can instance whatever I want into it. Or rather, what I used here is sort of a modular setup. You see, what I have is the circle array and then a bunch of vertices that I've only used the circle array because I do use the circle array in a lot of cases. I don't always use it to instance actual geometry. That's why here I just use it to create the initial points on top of which I then instance my verts. The point of this is kind of like a modular geometry node setup, so you can link them up so you don't have to have everything together and you can use them separately, for example, which is really useful. I find it really great. And you can see that we're really just zooming into his eye here. I didn't even put a holdout because I know that the next shot is completely white, so there's no point for a holdout. I guess this is it for this shot. There's nothing really that interesting. Did anybody see the angry moths, by the way? Because they were a bit of a chore to animate. There's a lot of them, and they started getting all mad here. You can sort of see them. They're super waggy because I have way too many things enabled. But if I hop into the phone, which is the next shot, you can see how this one starts. Believe me, it is shocking because actually this moth, the camera doesn't really zoom into him, but rather he pops out of nothingness, and I just scale him up. And that creates the illusion of the camera moving forward. The reason I do this is because this way I can keep everything here, otherwise I'd have to be moving the camera far out. And whenever I want to adjust it, it's a bit of a chore to fish it out. This is just my preferred method. What I'm scaling here is the actual object, because if you actually scale the root bone, it doesn't work that well. Then it just goes through. He gets spooked, he gets surprised, turns his head around, grabs the telephone. Let's talk about the telephone cord a bit. It's interesting. What we have here is a bunch of modifiers, but in reality, not that much stuff is happening. If I disable all of them, you can see that we're just starting off with well, obviously the hooks for the two ends. Every simulation needs hooks. Then I plug in the actual simulation, and what we're simulating is this thin strip. This is because clot is really fast and great, but it really only does collision when it has faces. So I had to give it some faces, and then I weld those points together so that it gives me a single line. And I weld with connected because it's faster than all. And after that, I subdivide this line that we have gotten, and then I give it a chord using geometry nodes. Like, how great is that? You're actually simulating only this, so it's fast, and then you're just popping in the geometry nodes to actually give it the chord. Oh, you like this mod, Torchik? You like this mod? That's a simulation for the phone, and obviously it is hooked to the both ends of the phone, both of which are instances. In this case, I don't know if I instance them. Yeah, they're instanced to this file because I also have the phone in the library. So for the mod that comes out of the phone, it actually gets smushed into the phone using a curve modifier, a curve deform. I haven't used the curve deform before, and basically as you move along the length of the curve, your objects get scaled to the radius of the curve at that point, which sounds great, right? I just put a curve here. Well, I cannot find the actual curve right now. It's called phone deform. Where is it? There it is. This is the actual curve that's deforming the object. You can see it's super tiny. The problem with this is that it ended up leaving a little bit of geometry back here. You can maybe see it. There's a little bit of geometry here that actually ends up, even if your radius is 0. This is a bit of a chore to remove. The easiest way to remove is with geometry node. You just say, okay, everything past, I do believe this is the y-axis of my object. Just delete that. So yeah, another great use for geometry nodes to remove that. And the actual mod itself, or the armature, is parented to the phone. That's how I get this smooth movement with the phone. And then this guy gets grabbed, and he actually gets deformed by a lattice here. You get a lattice here to deform him. I do believe I tried with a curve again, but it didn't work. So really you have to use whatever. And then a holdout is spawned. I do believe I can show that maybe. At the end of this phone, yeah, there's the holdout. It kind of gets snapped from the bottom, and the camera zooms into the holdout. And now we can move on to the spacing. Now this scene was hands down the hardest one to get right. Like I re-rendered this the most times because the lighting was so tricky. And I'll tell you right now why the lighting was so tricky, because there's actually 3 separate lighting setups right here. Okay, so this is the first setup right here where the camera zooms in into the face of my little moth. Maybe I'll just go into viewport shading. And this had to have special lighting to actually look decent. But then as we move forward, the walls actually disintegrate, right? They disintegrate around my moth. Oh, you can see the color balls here. They're not visible in render, by the way. I've disabled the render visibility. So this was also a challenge to light, because then in this same scene, I then transition to this shot where we're looking at our moth up close. There we go. So this required a different lighting setup. And then I moved forward to this shot when we're looking behind towards the light bulb, which required the third light setup. So more of the story is I should have split this up into 3 separate shots, because it's 3 unique lighting setups, and it becomes very hard to render them correctly when you're not just splitting it up. So yeah, this is definitely something I will keep in mind in the future. Splitting the shot whenever you can is never a bad idea. Actually, there's more stuff in this scene. Again, this scene is bigger than it should be. The dancing moth lair, these are the 2 moths that appear at the center. They just kind of hop on, and I had to render this separately and then compose it on top. So that's pretty obvious, because then over here later on they actually pop in again to dance with our guy. Although these are different moths, I had to kind of eyeball the color, make sure it's the same for them. Over here you're gonna notice there's no eyes, and the eyes are in their separate collection because I had to render them separately. The reason is because the sun that I was using to light the eyeballs kept reflecting inside them, and I couldn't just disable the well, technically you can go inside lights. If I find my sunlight, there it is. This is my sunlight. And if you go into visibility, you can disable glossy, which basically disables reflections. But then my moth looked weird because it has a sort of glossy material, so I couldn't do that, and in the end I just ended up rendering this separately. So again, this was a huge chore. I do not look very fondly back onto this scene. Yes, I did do this before light linking. Light linking actually came out after I finished the movie, like after I uploaded it. So no light linking, just this stuff. I don't know if there's anything interesting in this shot. You can see that my moth is rotating here. That's how I got that cool light effect. Maybe I can preview that. It's gonna be super bad. But yeah, I wanted the lights to sort of rotate around him. I'm not sure why I wanted that, but there you go. Of course, the bulb, which is an instance, again, just like all those other bulbs. Yeah, although it does have its intensity changed at some point. And yeah, also to make sure that the room was properly lit, which was another chore, I had to do the trick again, which I did with the stage, where the diffuse light is actually weaker than what you're seeing on camera. Otherwise it was lighting up very weird, because what I'm using to light the room is actually an area light, because the space shader I was using, which maybe you cannot see unless I enable it, the space shader I was using was too dim. Oh, and by the way, this is a space shader that I made just for this. I think it looks pretty decent. I don't know if you guys think it's worth like a tutorial. It's pretty fun to make, pretty fun it looks. And let's just, I guess that's it. But in order to make the room look seamless, what I mean by that is make sure that when it disintegrates, you don't notice that it's actually separate panels. I used the what was it? The data transfer modifier, and transferred the normals of the room before it was split to the split parts, and that's how I made sure the normals were the same as the original room. So that really helped out to get that seamless transition. And here's this big transition over here with the, I don't know, kaleidoscope, I guess I would call it. It is very heavy though, so I will not be rendering it in its entirety. In fact, I will probably disable this for now. Oh no, Blender is okay. So we start off here with a little bit of grease pencil. This is just a grease pencil, and it is on top of, well, on top of a holdout, because this is a pretty complicated setup right here where I had to separate different layers. So we have a holdout, and then before the holdout, we actually have the shader for the, oh, there it is, the background. This is also a very interesting one. All it is a Voronoi and some weird math function I found that gave this result. The Voronoi is for the sparkles. Yep. So then a bunch of stuff comes out over here. If I enable it, there it is. A bunch of stuff, just a random assortment of objects that come out. Animated this one by one. The blooming flower. Funny thing about this flower, I have a tutorial for it, but I haven't uploaded it yet because I have to edit it. Microphones, some stuff, they're all just basically animated. And then I instance them in a circle inside this object, which is called 8 8. That's like the whole circle, while this is 1 8, where I work on a separate part of it. So they get instanced in a circle, I do believe, again with my circle array. Yep, there it is. It has many uses. And then I also use instance on verts. In this case, I first instance them, and then I use circle array, apparently. Yep. And then if I remove even that, you're gonna see that all this is I do believe a single vertex. Yep, this single vertex, then instances this thing, and then the circle to actually get that array. They're all super low power. This scene was very waggy. I had to reduce the default quality of everything. And then the moths pop out. They just kind of pop out. Again, they're instances in a circle. You can see them dancing about and around. And the whole scene is actually laying flat. It's all Z up. I just kind of rolled with that, even though animating these moths a bit of a chore, because things just work different when you're looking them like this. And then a holdout opens out, it swallows everything. The color balls are used to offset the color of my moths. Because as I explained, they all have random color, but I also want to be able to control that color. So I use the X location of the color ball to offset the random value I'm using to drive the random color. That's basically it. I explained it at the start, I believe. So you can look at the actual example there. And then we go to this dance line. It is nothing special except for the giant cylinder, which houses all of my moth images. How neat is this? There's an infinite moth, if you will. If I go back to the start, you can actually see it. The way I actually make this move is I used a driver that is controlling the image sequence node with a special formula that lets me basically frame the location of it. If I pull out the material editor, I should be able to show that. There we go. So this is the actual value that I'm using to drive this value right here. And what I'm doing is I'm keying this value, which is letting me move the offset in such a way that whenever my frame changes, because by default the image sequence moves with your timeline, which is a huge chore. So I had to counter animate that by devising a formula for it. If I can get to that. Actually, the formula is right here. So this is the formula I came up with. It basically lets me key instead of the frame rate controlling the image behind, and that's how I synced it up with the music. Now, I'm not viewing it from the camera though. Okay. I actually don't know why I cannot see my mod currently. I should be able to. Yeah, this guy is facing the wrong direction. What the heck? Oh, that ain't good. Yeah, so this shot actually relied heavily on non-linear animation because I had to really use a lot of animation. Non-linear animation, a bit of a chore. It's not really that great for looping, which I needed to do here, but I kind of coped. I don't know why this mod is facing the wrong way. Let me actually resync this library. That might help. Yeah, it helped. So sometimes the libraries need to be resynced. I'm not sure why. But there you go. And these also change their color. This is another great benefit of having the bow offset. It lets me do this rainbow effect simply if I animate the bow. The position on the X for the bow. There's nothing much to say, except over here I also have this Shot 9 stills, where I recorded a version where this mod was dark and where it was also rigged for this very weird glitching effect at the end. That's pretty much it for this shot. Oh, I almost forgot this. These were the planes for all of the moths that appeared. Now the reason it looks super busted is because apparently I lost that particular image. Because I don't know why. It's supposed to be 0353. Where is that? Let me look for it. Well, I'm pretty sure it was this one. Yeah. This is what I use because, again, if I had to do this in the video editor, it would have been a chore because it had to have such a high count of images. Where do I actually see that? There we go. So here's where they all pop up. All the images pop up in front of the screen. If I hide some stuff, that should make it easier to see. Yeah, there we go. You can see that that is actually part of the scene. Because otherwise I would need to make, what, like 22 layers? Yeah, no thanks. Moving on to the... Well, this one is called sequences. It is the frame where the moth is getting poked and then he does a bunch of other stuff. So there's this weird dark hand here. I don't know what that's about. I don't know who that hand belongs to. But he pokes the moth for no reason whatsoever. Very aggressive. And what I actually used here for the stage is a shader. So this stage is simply a shader which uses the if I can select it, which I can't because I made it non-selectable. The reason I made it non-selectable is because I don't want to accidentally click on it while I'm animating stuff. But why are you not on the camera? You goof. Where are you looking? That's bonkers. I actually don't know what's happening there. There's no way you're... Oh, you're looking to the wrong camera. So I think there's different cameras here. Yep, I did have a separate camera for this. Well, what's the default camera called? Okay. There we go. So, yeah, a special shader for the floor, which just takes the distance from the center and makes a circle using a map range. That's all it does. And it amplifies the color at the center. The color is just the object color, which is right here on the object. And I have keyed this color, so then I can change it really easily. As for the rest of this scene, what is there to really talk about, except the fact that the mod does a bunch of wacky stuff. So, yeah, the whole... I actually just flipped the whole world, the whole floor over here to work as a background during the poke, because otherwise it just goes to the void. Like you wouldn't see anything in the background. But yeah, then we move over here where he starts doing a lot of goofy stuff. Some of which don't even work. How funny. No, actually in reality, and this is something I do need to explain a bit, it turns out that in Blender, if you disable the viewport visibility of a collection or anything, it can still evaluate. That's right, it can still load and stuff, which means low FPS during animation, which means you're gonna have a bad time. And the only surefire way to make sure something does not evaluate is to put it in a collection and then disable that collection from the view layer using this button. So I had to start doing that because this scene is really heavy. It has a lot of stuff happening on it. It's all in a single scene. And what I do then is I have two scenes, two view layers. One is called editing, which has only a single collection enabled at a time. And then the other one is actually called main, which has all the collections enabled. And the main one is what you're actually seeing during the render. And whenever I just want to edit something with good frame rate, I go into editing, which disables all of them for me. The only thing you need to make sure is that when you're rendering, you have render single layer, so it doesn't start rendering all of these collections. And other than that, this is a really great approach when you need to disable and enable a lot of things quickly. This is actually my main go-to way now. So what's happening here is a bunch of stuff. My stove is broken. You hate to see it. There's supposed to be a stove here. Let me resync the override. No dice, huh? Well, that might be the case because I did change this asset for my new movie. Kind of makes sense that it's a bit broken. Oh, in fact, it's not gonna stick around the whole time. God damn it, I should really be more careful. I'm not gonna fix this now. But what you're seeing is, wow, it is just gonna hang around, huh? Okay, so what you're seeing here is, oh, this smoke is fake. Don't even get confused. This smoke is just a material. It is just a noise or something similar like that. Something I whipped out real quick. Transparency noise. It is so fake. There's no way I'm doing a simulation for this. Oh, there's a bot in chat. How do I deal with that? Is he no longer in the chat? I don't know. I cannot tell. Let's hope that got rid of him, but I'm not that sure it did. I have not moderated YouTube chat before. I don't have any moderators. Anyway, spaghetti. The spaghetti is indeed a soft body simulation. However, I did cheat a little bit in that you're actually simulating only the raw edges. All you're seeing here is edges, and then after the simulation, I add some geometry to it. And then I apparently subdivide it for the render. Just a little bit of boost in quality. But yeah, meatballs, and this actually makes a happy face if you look at it. You know, just a little bit of a teaser here. And a little huge boxes at the end of the moth's arms in order to actually push at the spaghetti. I don't know what else is there to talk about in the shot. The water here is certainly very interesting because it is completely fake. All it is a noise texture, which... There we go. So the water is just a 4D noise texture, or rather a 3D noise texture that I'm moving through the Z dimension, and that gives it a feeling of being animated. Very, very silly stuff. Over here at DJ, where they're all dancing, I had to use nonlinear animation for this, but also had to... Yeah, I actually used nonlinear animation exactly because I wanted the jumping mods to be offset slightly. Jump rope. Seeing the jump rope here is, well, you guessed it, it's a geometry node. If I remove the node, it is just a curve. It uses pretty much the exact same thing as the phone cord, I believe. Let's move forward. Here we have our moth. Well, he's supposed to be doing something with the oven, but the oven broke, so we're not doing the oven. Here's the magical mod that is meditating. This is just a curve with some extrude geometry. This is probably the tray for the oven. He's flipping some burgers. The burgers actually procedural, or rather their material is procedural, which I think is pretty neat because you can't really tell from afar. But he's flipping burgers. Nothing much to say about this one. This is pretty interesting. For some reason here I decided it's a good idea to go all out. And actually make this out of a mesh. The actual card for the knitting is actual mesh. Again, this is overkill, but I just guess I felt like it at the time. What this is doing is it's using a single initial curve. If I can only see it, there we go. And it's extruding it along the normal, I believe. to create a knit, and the way it's doing that is with a fairly complicated node network. It's pretty long, it's not too complicated, but if you want to, I guess I could make a tutorial for this. Problem is it's not very usable in other situations, only if you need a long line of sweater, I guess, a giant sock. You cannot put this on another mesh. So I have to question this. Moving on. Yeah, this is the scene when the mod a little bit of science. There's the blackboard which doesn't work. That sucks. Over here the mod is just doing some experiments, and then the giant scary mod comes out, but it is actually rendered separately. Let me show you where it is rendered. It's rendered in a special view layer called evil moth. The reason it was rendered here is so that I can get a proper cut off for the shadow here. I didn't actually want this mod casting shadow on the plane below, so I actually just removed this plane. And I do believe I actually played around with the material here to get this effect. This portal is a material, again, it is procedural. It uses a noise texture and sort of twists things around. Oh no, I failed to remove the bug. I don't know how. Hide user on this channel. Okay, I think I did it. There we go. Now it's gone. For good. Evil moth is just the same moth, but it has a special material on its body. Because here I told you that it is possible to override materials on library overrides, and that's how this gets fixed. I no longer need to make special different rigs just for a different material. Not much to say. I also have holdout on the table so that we can get proper shadows when I overlay it on top of the main sequence. Other than that, it's just a giant mod. It has this background again because I need all of this transparent except for the background. A very interesting thing is the glitch effect that you see. It's actually made inside geometry nodes. What I'm doing is I am discombobulating this plane, which currently has this material. I'm not sure why it's lost it. Maybe I'll dig it out real quick. It was something like this, not exactly. Why is it pink? It's pink because I've mixed it. Okay, I've mixed it with an image sequence. Well, it's kind of broken. The reason it broke is because near the end I actually changed the naming schematics of everything. But I will be keeping this in mind in the future. Basically, it is just a geometry node that creates this glitch effect. I was gonna originally do it in a separate software, but I couldn't find a software that did the exact thing I wanted. So this is another geometry node right here. It's a bit of a doozy, not that complicated, but I'm not gonna go over it right now. If you do want to see more about this node, I could make a separate video for it, I guess. And then let's move to the iZoom. Oh yes, there's this little scene over here, like a transition between the multiple sequences and the heaven, I guess you can call it. I just have, if I can just go into the regular view mode. Yeah, all it is here is a bunch of grease pencils popping up in front of the camera as the camera is moving forward. And then there's a light that activates and the mod breaks his neck to turn around. Oh, and the guy also uses a special material. This is another material override which has a holdout. I've called it holdout eyes so that we can smoothly transition to the next frame. Not much more to say about this. except the fact that in order for holdout to work in cycles, and this is very weird, you actually need to enable the world transparency. I have reported this as a bug because it is a bug, but in order to go over that, or rather, you know, go around that, I created a giant plane here, so there's no transparency behind the moth itself. That's it. I'm using a spotlight here, not much to say. And here we go to the final scene. This is the actual scene that was rendered in Eevee. This is the only one because it has a lot of volumetrics. Probably the first thing you notice is that the clouds are all fake. They're just planes with rendered clouds. But I did render these clouds. I didn't rip this off the internet or anything. You can see the volumetric here. They render pretty well in Eevee. Again, this is why we used Eevee. And for the actual small moths, I used Boids, the Boid simulation method in the particle system, which is exactly for generating like flocks of things, so it worked perfectly. Oh, one thing to keep in mind is, even though I used Boids, I didn't actually give Boids any brain. They don't have a brain. The reason for this, if I can even find it, yeah, see, they don't have any. Boid brain is empty. I just used Boids because they had correct spatial orientations. If I used particles here, they started to flip all around and did all crazy somersaults. So Boids just, in this case, worked for the proper orientations of my mods. And yeah, they just kind of zoom around the camera here. Nothing too special. This is pretty much the whole scene. Oh, and the way I'm actually moving the particles is a force push at the start to spread them around, and then a force pull right here at the end to actually bring them back in behind the camera. That's the only movement they're getting. Then we have the green screen. This was a pretty silly idea when it came to me. Basically, we have our mod here in its suit with its little motion tracking balls. I think it's kind of silly. It's got a string and everything. He comes out, and then we have this producer mod which says, yep, it's all good, it all works. I don't know if anybody was actually able to read what's on this paper. Probably not. It's probably too silly to even make any sense, but I did bother writing it up. It's a meme, you guessed it. Yeah, boys, always with the memes. Yeah, pretty simple lighting setup. It actually, two area lights here. It's not actually coming from these lights, that'd be slow. It's just coming from these circles. But I do believe it simulates the light pretty well. The light of a green screen. This is a pretty simple scene, not much to talk about. The news one that comes up next is a bit more interesting. Again, I have some broken textures here, that's fine. But basically we're zooming out of here and into over here, where we have this super angry mod. By the way, this suit, as well as the other one that we saw on the sequences scene, is not at all rigged. It's just kind of parented to his body. It does not deform whatsoever. Like this piece here is just directly parented to the arm. And it is because I couldn't be bothered. The actual globe here, which is, you guessed it, broken because all my textures are moved a little bit, is rotating in space. Oh, why is it missing so many? I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. I actually want to see the globe texture. World map, black and white, okay. There we go, I fished it out. So what's actually happening here, I am using the, again, the back face, or rather, I'm using the geometry node. Oh no, I think Blender crashed. We flew too close to the sun. We did. Please just restart normally. Okay. Oh, you're very big. You're way too big, Mr. Window. Ah, this is such a chore. It's such a chore. My monitor is too big for this. Let's see. There we go. You know, what doesn't hurt you? Where were we at? It's gonna plop me down at the first scene. We were at the TV. At the TV smash. No, we were at the news. There it is. So I messed up everything. Alright. Technical difficulty. This is the problem with like live streaming. You know, I cannot just chop this off later. See Blender in its raw form. So anyway, you can see that the faces of this Earth are lit differently than the front. And this is because I used the geometry socket, or rather the geometry node, which lets me have 0 to 1 value for the back faces, so I can give them a different color. And it's all animation. It looks a bit weird in Eevee, but I believe in cycles it works fine. There it is. You can actually see the globe now. Fun stuff, globe. Mug here, again more stupid paper, and the news tagline is an actual geometry that's just in front, and it's just moving in. Again, I don't like compositing after the fact, it's a bit of a chore. I'd rather just have this right here, right now, and know that it works. Not much to say here, we can just move on to the TV Smash. TV Smash, this is all of it. I don't know if anybody noticed the waffle in the corner. But there it is, there's a waffle on the wall. It was originally going to be a clock, but then I realized I didn't make a clock model. And at this point I was near the end, so I was like, whatever. Nobody's gonna see it, it lasts 5 frames. We're missing the texture again, but basically he just smashes down and then it swaps out to this Voronoi texture, which is supposed to represent the broken TV. And the way it swaps it out is with a mix, and I have keyed the factor for it. That's all. Again, it's missing the original texture, which is just a still frame from the previous shot, nothing special. Yep. This is also pretty simply written, it just has 2 point lights. Newspaper, yeah, where he's holding the newspaper. Again, it's missing textures, maybe I can fish that out. There we go. Now you can actually see the entirety of the newspaper. Why is it getting so weirdly deformed though? What's that about? It's using vector UVs. Not sure. There's very weird stretching here. Maybe it needs to get subdivided. Although why would it not be getting subdivided currently? Huh. So apparently there was... I don't know, is this in the final render? I apparently smoothed out the UVs. I should have probably done keep corners. This isn't the final render, I haven't noticed that. But basically this is the newspaper, this guy is just flipping the newspaper. The newspaper does have a little geometry now just to deform it in the way I want it. It's pretty weird looking, but you can see it deforms the edges and it also deforms the center, so that I can get like a flipping effect. I don't know if it worked that well. And then it zooms out behind him to the next shot, which is the smartphone. Okay, I will need to fish out the textures for the smartphone though. 45. Yeah, there we go. 13, where is this one from? Okay. Yep, there it is. So this is all a material. The way I'm animating it like this, I do believe I just... Well, it's not that easy to interpret, is it? Well, I've clearly animated the Y of the UVs. So you can tell that these are all just images that are popped up from the UVs, and I'm just moving the entire UVs. Why is it not working? Oh, because I'm currently in a specific frame. I'm using mix to actually mix between them. And I'm not sure what I've exactly done here anymore to make them look like this. But basically this is all one material that I have animated. And you can tell because the transition between the separate pictures is just a solid blue. Which I didn't like, but I don't think I was able to fix it back then. Yep. And what else? Crystal ball. Yeah, here's where he looks through the crystal ball. The crystal ball is just a plane and a glass texture. What is missing? 26? Yeah, but 26 from where? Well, from the smartphone, presumably. There we go. This should be fine. Unless it's absolutely... Oh, there it is. You can see if you look at it from the back, it sort of deforms because it is glass. Yep. The reason it is not visible here is because all the image is actually transparent. So it kind of cuts off on its own here. But that looks fine. We have our table here. Moving on to our shower. This is the shower scene. This is actually the exact same shower, with some minor differences, that I used for the Luna animation. The real ones will know. And he just kind of gets scared. There's not much to talk about here. It's just a simple shower. Bit claustrophobic. Let me full screen that. There we go. I haven't even bothered to texture the back, because nobody cares. Nobody cares about the back. And finally, we have the end card. Ta-da! This is the entirety of it. Not much to talk about here. I did use a gradient for the world. Special material on the side of the world in order to get that smooth gradient in the end. Other than that, I guess my goose is cooked because I'm done. Like, this is it. Shadow holdouts, just so there's some shadow. Yep. Let's see, there's just thumbnail. And I guess that would be it. Actually, why do I have the thumbnail both here and in the stills? It's a total mess. It's a total mess. I'll definitely be more organized for the next one. Speaking of which, maybe I can show you guys a little preview of the next one. Okay, a little spoiler, just because you were sticking around for so long. How many people are here? Anyway, let's check it out. 12 people. Great stuff. Let's see, where can I find that? It's called Egg Movie. This is not the official final title. Wow. We're in a kitchen. It's a kitchen. Who could have thought? Who could have seen this coming? This is the current thing I'm working on. If you've been following my Twitter, I have actually posted some stuff in relation to this one in there. So you can probably figure out where different objects are gonna go. Whoops, maybe I'm spoiling too much right there. So I'm gonna leave it here. Do you guys have any questions? I guess there's a huge stream delay. I know about that. I should probably... I did a 1 minute stream delay because I thought it was a good idea. It wasn't. But yeah, overall, great stuff. I think somebody wanted a tutorial on the library overrides. They are a bit of a chore to figure out at first. But they're super useful. Yep. Thanks for watching. I guess I'll end